All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Welcome to WaterWise Landscaping for Colorado Springs. My name is Catherine Moravec, and I'm a Senior Water Conservation Specialist here with Colorado Springs Utilities. And I really appreciate you taking the time out of your Thursday evening to join us and to learn about WaterWise Landscaping. So let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, so here's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to start off talking a little bit about our community's water. We are going to talk about how to create a WaterWise landscape, and then we'll finish out with talking about some smart watering practices that you can use in your yard all summer long. All right, so we know Colorado Springs Utilities presentation on landscaping is complete without talking about our community's water supply. So as you all know, water is a critical life-sustaining resource that we use for a variety of uses. We use it to drink, of course, flush the toilet, shower, and we use it to sustain these beautiful landscapes that add value to our home and businesses. But we live in a semi-arid climate. Sometimes it's not as obvious as it was when the settlers were coming out and starting Colorado Springs. But we live in an environment where we only get 13 inches of precipitation on average during the summer months, and then 3 inches of precipitation during the winter months as snow. So as a community, we only really get 16 inches of precipitation here locally, which really is enough precipitation to support a shortgrass prairie. So the founders of Colorado Springs and the early people who moved here really decided to plant trees and plant landscapes to beautify their homes and businesses. And we water those with irrigation water. So where do we get that water from? It's tempting to think that we get all of the water for our community off of Pikes Peak, or we collect it locally. But that's actually not true. We don't get enough precipitation here locally to support our community, so we have to go farther west into the mountains to collect water that is melting as snow. Thank goodness we're a headwater state, and so we're very close to the source of supply. But the vast majority of our water is really melted snow. In fact, you might find it interesting to note that roughly 70% of our water supply comes from the Colorado River Basin. So we actually transport that water into our local watershed from the Colorado River Basin. Only 25% comes from Pikes Peak and the Arkansas River Basin, and then 5% comes from minor sources like the South Platte. So the good news is that our community has a lot of surface water as our source of supply, which is renewable. But as you know, surface water is highly variable, meaning that some years we get a lot of snow and some years we don't. And so our community is susceptible to drought. The founders of our city and our community has invested in a complex storage and delivery system to get that water from as far as 100 miles away to our community. This is a map where we are here in this blue star, and we have 3 major pipelines that bring water far away to our community. We have the Blue River Pipeline, we have the Homestake Pipeline that brings water this direction, and then we have the Southern Delivery System that brings water up from Pueblo Reservoir. So we're not on a natural river, and so we are dependent upon this highly complex and unique water delivery system to get water here. Because we rely so much on the Colorado River, I did want to point out that the Colorado River has been in a 22-year-long drought. 40 million people rely on the water that's delivered from the Colorado River in 7 different states. And as population has grown on the Colorado River, it isn't yielding as much water as it had in the past due to this really long drought. So this is a situation that we're watching very carefully here at Colorado Springs Utilities because we're so dependent on the water from the Colorado River. And we're taking a wide variety of actions to mitigate the impacts of the supply risks on the Colorado. It's just a good thing as a community member to follow in the news and keep your eye on. And we'll do our best to manage our community with the water supplies that we have. But it's a good reason to really think about making your landscape as water-wise as possible as you can. as this situation stays with us. So in order to really make sure that you have the latest information about our water situation, we do have a web page at our website, csu.org, called the Water Watch page. And this gets updated all the time, and you can find out what our current water situation is for our community. The key thing that I would recommend is that you look for how many years of demand that we have in storage. And what that means is throughout our network of 25 different reservoirs, we monitor the level of water in all of those reservoirs and add it all up and translate that number into years of demand. What that means is if we didn't get another drop of new water, how long could we sustain our community on the supply that we have? And as of February 2022, we could sustain our community for 2.6 years, which means our storage is in really good shape. We typically do not go into water restrictions unless our storage drops below 1.5 years in demand. So we don't expect to go into water restrictions in 2022. But anyway, it's a good place to get good information about our community's water supply and to see how things are trending. Now, in a typical household here in Colorado Springs, this is how that household would use water throughout the year. You can see that 35% of the water of a typical household is used to water landscaping. So making your landscape more water-wise is a big opportunity to manage your household's water use. And that keeps your water bills reasonable, and it helps us manage our community's water supply. Now you'll notice that the rest is used for indoor uses such as toilets, showers and bath, faucets, and clothes washing and leaks. So it is a good thing to do to look at the fixtures inside your house and make sure that they're as efficient as possible. And in fact, we have just relaunched a toilet rebate that you may want to take advantage of. So if you're a Colorado Springs Utilities customer, you can get up to $100 back on your toilet if you purchase a 0.8 gallon per flush MAP premium toilet. Limit is 3 toilets per household, and make sure that you check csu.org for the rules and application for the rebate. All right, so let's jump into what you're really here for, which is getting started with water-wise landscaping. Now, what I'm going to be talking about tonight is really tips and tricks for all types of people, but we will focus on people that are doing bigger renovations. So we're going to be talking about 2 different frameworks. So in order to make a landscape water-wise, you can use the 7 principles of xeriscape, which is really a framework to help make traditional landscapes as water-wise as possible. And this is a system that works really well here in Colorado Springs, and this is actually Lisa's backyard, her former backyard, and you can see how beautiful it is, that you can make a very usable, green, gorgeous landscaping using the 7 principles of xeriscape. But you could also use a different framework where you're thinking about making your landscape as naturalistic or xeric as possible. And the key here to this approach is to just use plants that are very drought tolerant. And so it's a bit simpler, but you can really get a lot of beautiful Colorado style landscapes with this type of approach. So now just going back to the water-wise traditional landscape, the tips and methods that you use to construct this type of landscape is to make sure that you hydrozone. So first of all, you want to make sure that you're grouping all of your high water use plants in one area and watering those on their own sprinkler zone. So that would be things like your vegetable garden or your lawn. And you can see in this picture that there's a really nice small lawn that is watered on its own zone. And that brings me to the next point, which is that if you have an area of turf grass in your landscape, make sure that you limit its size and use efficient irrigation sprinklers and irrigation controllers. And then your plant beds, that's where you can use lower water plants and group those into areas that you're watering separately from your lawn, and water those even perhaps with drip irrigation, which is very efficient because it's watering the soil and it's not throwing water through the air. And in those plant beds, you want to make sure that you're using a mulch like wood chips or shredded wood or bark chips or even gravel And that by doing that, you're covering the soil and making a really great rooting environment for all the plants in your plant beds. So this is a really good approach to use here in Colorado Springs, where you're balancing having a traditional looking landscape, you're including some turf grass, but you're still taking measures to make your landscape as water-wise as possible. Now with this other naturalistic or xeric approach, rather than focusing on hydrozoning, you just say, okay, I'm going to really focus on using very xeric or native plants throughout my whole entire landscape. You might include a patch of native grass or even a large area of water-wise native grass, or you might have no grass at all. You might water a xeric or a naturalistic landscape maybe as much as once per month or once per week, but typically not over once per week. And you can see that this approach can lead to significant water savings. And it really gives you a very Western look to your landscape and can really help blend into natural areas and enhance the beautiful setting which we find ourselves here in Colorado Springs. The very nice thing about having a naturalistic or a xeric approach to your landscape is that it's very resilient to drought. So we manage our water system so that we go into water restrictions on average once out of 10 years. We plan on that. That's something that we assume is going to happen because we are a community that is susceptible to drought. And so if you have turf grass in your landscape and we go into water restrictions, you're going to see a bit of browning, maybe a bit of dormancy on that type of landscape. These naturalistic and xeric landscapes really don't show much impact if we go into drought and water restrictions. So that's something to think through that you might want to consider as you're making decisions for your landscape. One thing that I find is beneficial about choosing an approach, either the 7 principles or a naturalistic xeric approach, is that it will help you make better decisions. So when you're starting to make decisions about things like, what type of edging am I going to use? Or am I going to use edging at all? Or how am I going to lay out my sprinkler system? Do I even need to add compost to the soil before I plant, or can I skip that step? And what type of plants am I going to use? Having a framework will really help you make those decisions, because if you're going down the 7 principles path, you know, the recommendations are really clear. Yeah, you want to mix some compost into those areas where you're going to be planting your lawn. And you're going to want to make sure that your irrigation layout is really set pretty well for your high water use areas. And for a naturalistic landscape, you might not even include edging. So this will really help you have a coherent, well-planned, well-installed landscape by choosing a framework. Now I want to mention that we do have 2 really great recorded webinars out there that can lead you through the steps to create either a water-wise landscape design using the 7 principles. That's a great webinar that really walks you through that process. Or we have another webinar that you might want to explore, which is called Designing a Drought-Resistant Landscape. And both of these webinars are really fantastic. They are chock full of pictures of landscapes that were created in Colorado Springs using these approaches. So I would highly recommend you taking a look at both of those in order to get great information and also to get great ideas. Now, if you're not doing a full-on landscape renovation, that's okay. If you're working with an existing yard and you need to take things more incrementally, that's perfectly fine. You can still use these principles and these ideas to help you with your landscape. So one thing you can do if you're working with an existing yard is really focus on updating and managing your sprinkler system if you have one. It's probably in a condition where it could stand some updates, and we've got some really great rebates for you to take advantage of. But that will help you get in a situation when you're ready to plant. If your sprinkler system is up and updated and ready to water, then that's going to help you be efficient and support new plants really well. You can also work on updating smaller areas of your yard. So if this is your landscape, you might want to focus on the side yard right here and just tackle a certain area and just work your landscape in phases so that you can tackle the whole entire thing over time. That is something that many of us do to spread out the expense and the workload. And as you're doing that, just make sure that you're updating your landscape with water-wise plants as well. So even though you might have a really beautiful maple tree in your yard, over time you might want to choose a more water-wise selection that will be more drought resistant, that will last a bit longer in our climate. So those are some tips for those of you that are working with an existing yard where you're not going to be tackling a renovation all at once. But let's go ahead and jump into some tips about how to create a water-wise landscape and how to consider water when you're planning your landscape. Oftentimes it's really common that we jump into landscape projects and we get really enthusiastic and we think of all the beautiful plants that we're going to bring into our yard, and we forget all about the water. So here's the section where we just want to say, consider water use as you're planning, because that will help you have a reasonable water bill and a sustainable landscape over time. So the first step is that you want to make sure that you record all the features on your site. And when you're doing that, you want to do things like note where your existing vegetation is that you're going to keep. You want to note where you have water coming into your landscape, maybe from your downspouts or any low areas that might be getting drainage from another part of your property. You want to make sure that you note any areas that are really sunny or exposed to wind. And if you do that, then you're kind of getting an assessment of the opportunities and the limitations of your site. And that'll really help you down the road, because you will note that if you're going to plant a beautiful tree, you don't want to block the most amazing view that you have from your picture windows. Or if you're planting a really, really xeric plant, you don't want to put that in an area where you have water collecting on your property. So doing this site inventory is just going to help you make better decisions down the road. And if you can, identify how you're going to be using your yard. That'll help you create a yard that is much more usable when you're done with your projects. And then think about if you have any limitations for maintenance, water use, and your budget. And then you want to choose a look. So we're going to kind of go through these steps, realizing that if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail, according to Benjamin Franklin. So when you're planning, you want to kind of make sure that you have an overhead view to be working with. And this is a picture of Lisa working with a screenshot of a property. Okay, so you can get rough dimensions of your property and try to get a sense of how big things are, so that when you're adding plants, you're making sure that you're going to be adding plants that will fit the space as they grow over time. Okay, so as we mentioned, you would be recording site details so that you are making sure that you have a good assessment of the opportunities and limitations for your site. And then you want to go into kind of the dreaming phase, where you think about how you want to use the space. Maybe you want to have an outdoor dining area. Maybe you want to have a recreation area, a fire pit, a place for your dogs and your kids to play, or maybe even a storage area. So as you start to think through these things, you'll want to think about the spatial needs for the uses that you want to include into your landscape. So if you're going to have a lounging area, make sure that you make that 12 by 12 or larger. That is guidance from Lisa, that she said, you know, anything smaller than that is really not going to support that type of use. And if you're going to have an outdoor dining area, make sure that you have a sense of how big of a table you're going to have, and make sure that you add 3 feet to the side of the size of your table, so that you have sufficient space to get up and move around the table and move chairs in and out. It'll just make it a lot more usable in the end. So trying to think of how you're going to use the space and get some spatial arrangements and some sizes is really going to help you make a plan. And then you want to think about water use. So rather than thinking of having to make your whole entire landscape one way or one water use, You can think of applying a water use in areas of your yard so that you're managing your landscape water use as an overall budget. Now, as you're doing this, just make sure that you think you're aware that the price of water is going to go up over time. It doesn't go down here in Colorado. And then assume that we're going to go into water restrictions once out of every 10 years or maybe more frequently, depending on our water supply. But this picture over here is going to help you just figure out how to think of water in your landscape in terms of a budget. So the pink bubbles are uses that don't require any water. So things like a patio, a courtyard, a parking area, a storage area. That is going to help create usable space that doesn't require any ongoing water. And then for low water area, maybe you would have a low water grass in your front yard, and maybe you would be watering that maybe once per week. And then in the backyard here, in this particular plan, we have a bubble or an area for medium water where there's shrubs and perennials. Maybe that would be a 2 times per week watered area. And then you might even have some high water use areas in your yard, like a small patch of lawn for your kids or your dogs. And if you have a vegetable bed, that's going to be an area that you'll want to water regularly. So you can see that by thinking about having different water use areas in your yard, you can manage your overall water use because your no water areas are going to compensate for the high water use areas that you have. All right, so we have a diagram here that just gives you some codes about different watering areas and what they might mean. And if you go to our plant water use database, which is waterwiseplants.org, all of the plants in this database have a water use symbol, and that will tell you on average how often they need to be watered once they're established. And you can click on this yellow button right here to learn more about the water use. So going back to this picture, you can see that this particular landscape has a really nice outdoor living space that is just using a simple gravel as the ground cover. It's got a nice little lawn back here, and then it's got a beautiful vegetable and shrub area. And you can see how you can get such a really nice usable landscape using this technique. All right, now as you're doing this, as you're renovating your landscape or doing landscape projects this spring, make sure that you're creating practical grass areas. So you don't want to cover your whole entire landscape in grass. We would call that wall-to-wall or fence-to-fence turf grass, and that's going to create a big water bill for you, and it's going to be a lot of weekly mowing and a lot of maintenance. So here in Colorado Springs, we find what works best is having more like a throw rug of grass. So if you keep your grass around 1,000 square feet total, or maybe even a bit more than that, that's going to get you in the range where you're going to have a manageable water bill and very easy maintenance. And that might be a cool season high water use grass like Kentucky bluegrass that we have here on the left, which is the most common grass that we have in Colorado Springs. Or there's a whole other set of grasses that you can use. In this particular landscape, this landscape is using blue grama grass, which is a native grass here to Colorado Springs. And it can be watered as little as once per week or maybe even every 10 days. So the cool season grasses are the best for high traffic, and the native grasses are the best water savings grasses that we have. So if you'd like to learn more about this, we do have some additional resources, and you can always visit our demonstration garden to see what they look like in person. Now, as you're renovating your landscape or you're installing a new landscape, try to choose a desired look. So a traditional landscape might be one where you have an area of grass and you have clearly defined plant beds that are edged with edging or rocks or something like that. So you have your ornamental grasses, your flowers, your shrubs, your trees, and your plant beds, and then you have your lawn areas. Now this is a landscape here in Colorado Springs, which is a very traditional, but it uses buffalo grass as the lawn, which is once again a native grass that can be watered once per week. So a really good option to consider. Now this, on the other hand, would be what we would consider a xeric landscape. And you can see it's full of color, it's full of texture and beauty. This is one of our demonstration garden volunteers landscape. Her name is Linda, and she's done such a fantastic job creating this very Western looking landscape with all sorts of colors and textures. So this, if you're going down this road, you want to make sure that you know that ahead of time so that you can make this type of landscape look really intentional and not kind of jumbled and mixed up. And then you can also choose something that's a more naturalistic style. So in this particular case, there's a blue grama grass lawn that is in this area over here that they've left unmowed, and they really don't have things separated by edging. Everything is sort of intermingling and blending in with the other plants around it. So this is a good option for water use. It's also a good option if you really like things informal and are wanting to do less maintenance in your yard. That can be an option to consider. We do have a website, waterwiseplants.org, where we have a local landscape gallery, and you can see all sorts of landscapes from Colorado Springs that are water-wise. So it's a good option to consider. Okay, so we are going to move on to plants. So if anybody is from a different climate where it might be a little warmer or milder, it can be frustrating to figure out how to get things to grow here in Colorado Springs. And in fact, oftentimes people will come to the Conservation and Environmental Center where we have our award-winning xeriscape demonstration garden when they've just killed a whole bunch of things and they're just totally exacerbated. And we want to help give you some tips to prevent you from spending a lot of money on plants that are not going to make it, and help you find things that are going to last year after year and really enhance your landscape. And they're out there. So first tip is just to go ahead and visit our demonstration garden for ideas. We have a 2-acre demonstration garden here at 2855 Mesa Road, which is the Colorado Springs Utilities Conservation and Environmental Center, and it's open during daylight hours any day of the year. We do have staff on site Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, although we are closed for lunch from 12 to 1, and we can help walk you around and answer any questions that you might have. We also have another garden in front of the Cottonwood Creek Recreation Center at 3920 Dublin Boulevard, and that's a great resource for those of you on the northeast side of town. It's a bit smaller and it's not staffed, but it still has a lot of good ideas. All right, so when you are selecting water-wise plants, you want to make sure that you know your site needs. You want to know the size and form of the plant. We'll also talk about planting in groups, and then we'll talk about texture. So let's go ahead and jump right in. You do need to choose plants that work for your site and for the needs that you have at your site. So there's a couple different criteria that you should take into account. First of all, you need to choose things that are going to be winter hardy. So they need to be hardy to zone 5 if you're in the center part of Colorado Springs. And if you're a little bit higher in elevation, you want to make sure you're choosing plants that are hardy to zone 4. Zone 3, zone 2 is okay as well. But don't choose zone 6, zone 7 plants because those just won't make it through the winter here. You also need to figure out if that plant is going to be planted in a sunny area or a shady area. And you can typically find out the recommended sun exposure at waterwiseplants.org. And you can see if that plant will tolerate part shade or full shade. And then you want to make sure that you're choosing plants that are going to fit your landscape over time and that have the right water use for how often you plan to water in the future. And then if you have deer or rabbits, then you got some limitations you have to work within, but there are still really nice plants that you can use even if you have wildlife considerations. All right, so we did talk about waterwiseplants.org. It is a really fantastic resource. We have over 400 different types of plants, including virtually, well, most of the plants we have at the demonstration garden are listed on the website with photos that showcase what the plants look like throughout the year. You can make your own favorites list and share that with other people. And we also have the photo gallery of Waterwise local landscapes for inspiration there. Now, as you're doing your design or you're choosing plants, make sure you take into account size, form, and planting in groups. So one of the tips that people like Lisa often say, who are the professional designers, is make sure you're not planting one of everything. Buy 3 or 5 or 7 of a particular plant that you want to include in your landscape and plant them in groups, and that will give you a much more unified, cohesive look to your landscape. So in this particular landscape, we have Grow Low Sumac, which is this really nice ground cover shrub. This is a great low maintenance plant that really can cover some space. Beautiful red fall color. And then on this side we have Gold Mound Spirea, which is more of a mounding form of a shrub that's gotten really nice pink flowers in spring. And then we have Russian Sage, which is the taller, more upright plant in the background, providing purple flowers in July. And then we have an ornamental grass over here, which is maiden grass or miscanthus. So you can see that very simple landscape, very simple maintenance, but still looks professionally designed and really has different interests throughout the growing season. Now here in this part of our Cottonwood Creek demonstration garden, we have another set of plants that maybe you want to consider creating a combination like this in your own landscape. So we have a beautiful bristlecone pine, which is a really tough evergreen tree in the background. We have golden currant, which is a shrub right over here that's a bit more tall and deciduous. And that particular plant has a really nice set of yellow, fragrant flowers in the spring, and then bright red fall color. We have Russian Sage peeking up in the background, showcasing its purple flowers in July. We have English Lavender, which is more of a mounding perennial flower, creating those beautiful spikes of purple flowers. And then we have Moonshine Yarrow, which is a really adaptable plant that creates clusters of yellow flowers in midsummer. And then Lisa would recommend even creating or adding Blonde Ambition Blue Grama Grass, which would be a really nice ornamental grass that's about 3 feet by 3 feet to give you more interest throughout the fall and into the winter. Now, when you're choosing plants, just remember that color goes well beyond flowers. So a good example of that is Russian Hawthorn, which is a small ornamental tree that has white flowers in spring. And then in the fall, it has this beautiful gold to orange fall color of the leaves, which the flowers will turn into red berries in the fall. And then they'll hang on the plant for quite a while until the birds pick them off for food throughout the winter. So this type of plant really has much more interest throughout the growing season than just a simple plant that is flowering for a few weeks. So look for those plants that have multiple seasons of interest to make your landscape look more interesting throughout the whole entire growing season. Now here's an area of the landscape that Lisa designed up at our demonstration garden that is a really nice low maintenance combination of water-wise plants. And this is what it looks like in spring. We have Blonde Ambition Blue Grama Grass, which is just a simple green mound at this point in time. We have Baby Blue Rabbit Brush, which is a fantastic low silvery leaved shrub that is really low maintenance and has yellow flowers in the fall. We have Colorado 4 o'clock, which is a native flowering perennial that has pink flowers. And then Black Knight Spirea, which is an introduced but adapted shrub that has purple flowers in July and is a really great food source for bees. So in spring it looks like this, and then in midsummer or towards the end of summer when everything is in full bloom, it looks like this and you get a lot more texture. And going into the winter, even when the plants go dormant, they're still really attractive. You have these spent flower clusters that are hanging on the plants and the full glory of the ornamental grasses. And then in winter, we have this beautiful texture. So where you might have with a lawn just a really flat, non-interesting landscape in winter, when you start to add more water-wise plants in, you get this variation in color and texture and the opportunity to create beautiful combinations that enhance your landscape throughout the growing season. So come and visit our water-wise demonstration garden up at the Mesa demonstration garden. There you can find not only the demonstrations, but you'll find a plant list and the layout of each of these water-wise neighborhood demonstrations that can really help you get a jump start on planning your own landscape. All right, so just a few more ideas to help you plan and pick out plants. You can make sure you take advantage of the demonstration gardens and the templates at each WaterWise neighborhood landscape. We have webinars, we have our waterwiseplants.org. You can also take advantage of the services at local nurseries and local landscape professionals. We have some really great knowledgeable people that work in our community that would be certainly willing to help you out. All right. So with this, what I want to do just in our last few minutes is talk about a few tips to help you water efficiently. So as you plan your landscape, as you get your plants installed, how do you sustain them over time and have a reasonable water bill? So there's just a few things we want to talk about. First of all, how do you manage your sprinkler system? How do you water different areas of your landscape? How do you figure out if you're using the right amount of water? And then how do you make sure that you're using efficient sprinkler equipment? All right, so our watering efficiently webinar is going to go into all these sections in detail. So these are just the highlights. First of all, when you have a sprinkler system, it's a huge asset. In Colorado, if you are hand watering, you can never go on vacation. It's difficult to buy new plants and get them established. If you have a sprinkler system, you have a really, really great asset because when it's dry, the sprinkler system can do the watering for you. It is worthwhile investing in learning the main components of your sprinkler system. So we have a webinar for that. Go ahead and check that out. It's called Getting to Know Your Sprinkler System. And do a monthly sprinkler check. Make sure that everything is working properly because it's common for sprinkler systems to have some breaks and some leaks. So when you do that monthly sprinkler check, you're just making sure that everything is working properly and catching anything that needs to be repaired before it becomes a major issue. And then you can decide if you want to do things yourself or if you want to hire a professional. Either one is okay to help you manage your sprinkler system. Even a combination of doing some of the work yourself and having someone come out and do some work for you also works. All right, so if you do not have efficient sprinkler equipment, meaning your sprinkler equipment is not been installed in the past 10 to 15 years, you may have significant room to get better performance and use less water. So you want to think about things like installing a smart controller, making sure you have a rain sensor that will stop your system from running when it rains. You might want to consider having pressure regulating heads, sprinkler heads with check valves, match precipitation nozzles as well. All of these components can work together to help you use water really, really wisely and sustain your plants over time. There's some great information on our website that I will point you to for now, but keep in mind that if you're going to be installing any of this equipment, which I do highly recommend, keep your receipts and make sure that you purchase equipment that are eligible for our rebates, because we have some fantastic, really generous rebates to help you install this equipment. So be sure to check that out. Now, what type of watering system should you even be using? You know, there's really overhead irrigation, which are traditional sprinklers that throw water through the air. There's point source drip and there's inline drip. So just keep in mind that if you have a lawn area, you want to use sprinklers to water that because you're going to be watering the whole entire surface of the soil. If you have an area where you're watering trees or shrubs, you can use drip irrigation, and you might want to use point source irrigation because that will help you water the area that you want to water and not water all the area in between. But if you have a dense area of planted plants, like in this example, you've got an area of perennials and ornamental grasses and shrubs, you can use inline drip, which has the drip emitters manufactured inside the tubing. So that can be really helpful, especially if you have shrubs that are going to be really tall and block sprinklers. So I highly recommend taking a look at drip irrigation for your plant beds here in Colorado Springs and for your vegetable garden. Those can be great options to help you use water really efficiently. All right, now for your sprinkler areas, particularly if you have grass, you want to make sure that you're watering enough to sustain the plants, but that you're not wasting water over time. So just a few tips to get you started there. Make sure that you're watering less often in the cool months of spring and fall, and watering more often during the hotter months of June, July, and August. So typically in April and October, you might be watering only 1 day per week. In May and September, you might be watering 2 days per week. And in midsummer, you probably would be watering your lawn areas 3 days per week. Every time you water, aim to apply enough to run your sprinklers long enough that you're putting down about 1/2 inch of water every day for your watering day. And if you are seeing any runoff, then consider looking into cycle and soak, because that'll help reduce the runoff and make sure the water is going to your plant roots. So just bookmark that in your mind, cycle and soak if you see runoff. So how long should you be running your sprinklers? Well, that depends on what type of sprinklers you have. So if you have a traditional pop-up fixed spray nozzle, which is very common in home landscapes, you could start out watering that zone about 20 minutes per watering day. If you have rotors, or the type of sprinklers that rotate through with a single stream, think about running those 45 minutes to put down that 1/2 inch of water. And if you happen to have multi-stream rotary nozzles, or you're going to change to multi-stream rotary nozzles, you have to water quite a bit longer to get that same 1/2 inch of water. So you'd be running those about 60 minutes per watering day. All right, so as I mentioned, we're not going to go deep into watering tips today. I just want to make sure that you are aware that these things exist. We have our rebates to help you upgrade to efficient equipment. We have recorded webinars to help you learn all the components of a sprinkler system, also figure out how to water your lawn, and how to get started with drip irrigation as well. We also have a series of fact sheets and videos available at our website, and I would highly recommend taking a look at those to help you get started, because if you put all this time and energy into creating a beautiful landscape, you want to make sure that you're watering it consistently to support the health and beauty of your landscape plants, but you want to make sure you're doing it in a way that uses water as efficiently as possible. And all of these resources can help you tie all that together so that you're using water wisely over time. And that'll really help your landscape look great and help keep your water bills really sustainable. So the last thing I'm going to do is just bring your awareness to the fact that we do have outdoor watering rules called the Water Wise rules. These are intended to reduce water waste but still allow you to have a beautiful, sustainable landscape in our community. Now keep in mind that the Water Wise rules only apply to sprinklers. So if you are watering with drip irrigation, or you're hand watering with a shutoff nozzle, or you're watering with watering cans, none of these rules apply to that. It's just to the areas that you're watering with sprinklers. So just to go over the rules really quickly, and then we'll have time for another set of questions if there are any. Just make sure that you're watering up to 3 days per week. So don't water more than 3 days per week, but you can water up to 3 days per week with your sprinklers. You choose the days. So you don't have to water on any specific days, just water on the days that are going to work best for you. Now from May 1st to October 15th, make sure that you're running your sprinklers either before 10 a.m. or after 6 p.m. so you're not running your sprinklers during the heat of the day. Now, if you have sprinklers that might have gotten turned a different direction or are broken, make sure you're watering in a way that you're not letting water pool or flow across the ground. If you're seeing a lot of runoff, then either cycle and soak, which you can find out more information about that, or you might have a leak or a break in your system. Now, speaking of which, if you do have a leak or a break in your system, make sure you're repairing that within 10 days. And if you're watering anything or you're using, the first 4 rules are really the ones that are focused on watering with sprinklers. The last 2 are focused on washing things outside. So if you're washing anything with a hose, like you're washing your car, make sure that you use a nozzle that will shut off when you release the hose. So if you happen to set it down, the water is not pooling and flowing out of the hose. So be sure to get that shut off nozzle, and you can get one at any home improvement store. And if you're cleaning a hard surface like a patio or a driveway or a sidewalk, try to use a blower or a broom first, and use water only if there's a public health or safety concern. So if you like to clean your driveway, I would encourage you to invest in a blower and save the water for the occasional times when you might need to use it because of a public health concern. Okay, now if you are going to be planting new plants this spring or summer, and you're going to be needing to water more often than 3 days per week with your sprinklers, make sure you get an establishment permit, which will allow you to water during the day and water more than 3 days per week. There's no cost to that, and you can find out about it online. Now, if you are going to have trouble to water 3 days a week just because of the way your sprinkler system is set up, then look into getting a water allocation plan, which can give you a little bit more flexibility in the 3 day per week rule. All right, so with that, I think that's what we're going to cover tonight. Thank you very much for hanging out with us. If there's any additional questions, we can have those now. And if not, we will wish everyone well with their gardening season.